In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
One of the main drivers of deforestation is the soy sector. Related infrastructure also gives a big help. It was never a secret that the election of Jair Bolsonaro, president of Brazil, was with the support of the agribusiness. They would love to see Amazon become a big cattle and soy field. That's because he delivers. In 2019, we had the highest deforestation level in 11 years. 2020 is already 23% over that. Until October this year, we had more fires in the Amazon than the whole 2019. Over 89 spots of fire found this year in the Amazon. The Amazon is burning with the consent and the support of the Brazilian government. And yet for the Netherlands, it is business as usual. The Netherlands is the fourth biggest importer of the Brazilian soy through the soy corridor. 6 out of 10 banks, 5 out of 9 insurance companies, and 10 out of 10 pension funds are somewhat involved with high-risk deforestation companies in the Amazon. This is what a recent Fair Finance Guide published last August. And that was all done under the banner of sustainability.
So what does this have to do with us here in the Netherlands? Through this livecast, organised today by the Amsterdam Collective for Democracy in Brazil, together with our partner organisations, Transnational Institute, TNI, SOMO and Both Ends, we'd like to learn together about how Dutch corporations and investors are benefiting economically from exploitation of the Amazon forest and its peoples. And to do that, we're really privileged today to have with us on Zoom Vandré Borari, a leader of the Borari people in Santarém, Pará State in Brazil. Vandré is a ceramist. She's also a leader of her people, as I've said, and a human rights and environmental activist. A warm welcome to you, Vandré. We are so pleased to have you with us tonight on Zoom. And we're also going to talk to Dr. Tim Bulkart Van Sollinger. Welcome, Tim. Tim is here with us in the studio. He's a geographer, criminologist, independent UN consultant, and research fellow in criminology in the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. Tim is also the director of the NGO Forest Forces. It's really great to have you with us in the studio today, Tim. Thank you. We'd also love you to be part of the conversation. You probably will have seen that there's a chat function in Zoom, and we have Gabby Braga backstage looking after that live chat. Please do feel free to talk to each other, to talk to her, to comment on the programme. And there's also a Q&A button where you can ask questions to the speakers. We would ask you to keep the questions short and also tell us to whom you'd like to ask the question, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as possible during the programme. I'm Celia.
And I am Juliana. And together with many other politically active Brazilians living in the Netherlands, we formed the Amsterdam Collective for Democracy. We organized in 2016 because we could not watch silently the undermining of our democracy with the impeachment of President Dilma. And throughout this 4.5 years, we have organized demonstrations in Amsterdam, in The Hague. We have fought against the illegal imprisonment of President Lula. We have fight for justice for Marielle Franco and act against the exploitation of Amazon and its peoples. We have promoted debates with scholars, politicians, activists. We had 2 editions of a political film festival, the Screening in Brazil, together with Film House Caviar. And as it happened with us, it happened also with a lot of Brazilians living everywhere in the world. So in 2017, we have created the FIBRA, the International Front for Brazilians Against the Coup. And we're now 58 collectives in 25 countries and counting. This event is to raise awareness of issues that connect both of our societies, because we Dutch and Brazilians, we have more in common than not. We invite you then to fight with us, because what we fight is what better describes us. We'd fight for democracy, for an environmentally sustainable development, for economically just societies. We fight against racism, we fight against homophobia, xenophobia, and all kinds of discrimination. So this is our fight. We invite you to fight with us. This is the Amsterdam Collective for Democracy.
So now that we've had the chance to introduce ourselves and our activism a little bit, we have the privilege and the pleasure to chat to both Tim and to Vandria. And Vandria, it would be great to start with your first testimony.
Olá a todos, meu nome é Vandria Borari, sou do território Borari indígena Alter do Chão, no município de Santarém, no oeste do Pará. Sou bacharel em Direito pela Universidade Federal do Oeste do Pará, sou ceramista e sou ativista indígena. Atuo na luta e na defesa dos nossos direitos e dos nossos territórios aqui na região do Baixo Tapajós. Nós, indígenas desta região, somos em torno de 70 aldeias, 8.000 indígenas, além de comunidades ribeirinhas, pescadores e pescadoras, extrativistas e comunidade remanescente de quilombolas. A nossa região ela é considerada no Brasil uma das regiões mais preservadas da Amazônia, né? Então, pelo fato de ser uma região rica em floresta, em água, em minério, ela atrai grandes empresas nacionais e internacionais. Em 2003, nós tivemos a instalação de uma empresa norte-americana, a Cargill, que é uma empresa de grãos, né? Ela se instalou nas margens do rio Tapajós, na cidade de Santarém. Quando a Cargill chegou para nossa região, houve o aumento desenfreado, né, do desmatamento nas regiões do Planalto Santareno, né, que avançou sobre territórios indígenas e comunidades de remanescente de quilombolas. Com a vida da empresa, né, para o município de Santarém, atraiu grandes produtores de grãos vindo do centro-oeste, né, para nossa região. Com isso, aumentou o desmatamento, os conflitos pela terra, né, principalmente sobre as terras indígenas, a perda significativa da nossa biodiversidade, né? Nós tivemos uma perda muito grande aqui na região de Santarém com relação à população de abelhas em decorrência do agrotóxico utilizado nas plantações de soja. Nós tivemos também a poluição, né, dos nossos lençóis freáticos e dos nossos igarapés, né, que sustentam o nosso Lago Verde aqui e também são cursos d'água que desembocam, né, no rio Tapajós. A própria Cargill, ela destruiu um sítio arqueológico que para nós era um dos maiores sítios aqui da região de Santarém, né? Ela se sobrepôs, foi construída, né, em cima de uma área sagrada. Muitas peças foram destruídas. A gente tem também a Bayer e a Bung, que são empresas internacionais. Elas comercializam, né, o agrotóxico, que são venenos, né, utilizados nas plantações de soja. Então, a gente vê, né, que quando uma empresa se instala numa região, né, de floresta, que tem povos indígenas, esse desenvolvimento da agricultura em grande escala, né, ele traz uma exclusão social, uma concentração de renda, né, e viola, né, o direito, né, de nós, povos indígenas, a permanecer nas nossas áreas, né, de ocupação tradicional, de ocupação milenar. A perda da terra é uma perda de referência da vida, da cultura, da espiritualidade.
Andrea, for your powerful initial testimony. It's really quite shocking and quite thought-provoking to understand exactly what's happening in your region of Santarém in Pará State. Tim, we've heard from Vandria then about the expansion of territorial control by transnational corporations. And its brutally destructive impacts, and we've heard about, you know, the impacts on biodiversity, on the forest itself, in relation to territorial conflicts. But we were wondering also if you could tell us a bit more about Dutch transnational corporations, the ones that invest and operate in this region. For example, in your chapter of the recent Fair Finance Guide that Jules mentioned in the introduction, you talk about the direct and indirect involvement of Dutch banks and other investors in soy infrastructure, and also Dutch consultancy firms and organizations in developing plans for transport corridors in the region. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, Vanya's right that the region or the whole Amazon attracts a lot of companies, Brazilian companies and international companies. It's really quite striking if you travel in the region that how many multinationals are present. So if you talk about the presence of multinationals, it's a lot of the soy companies, and infrastructure is central, of course, because it needs to be exported, such as to Europe. So it's about port constructions. That's where you see the company. Well, the Dutch involvement is often because a lot of these soy companies are not Dutch, but there's Dutch money going into those companies. For example, Cargill, it's the biggest soy company, the biggest company. It's actually the biggest private company in the US. And they're the biggest player in soy, the biggest global player. And so they build harbors, and that's how it indeed, as she explained, that's how it starts the deforestation. Well, this is a US company, but Dutch banks, several Dutch banks invest in this or give loans to this company. So in that sense, it's indirect. If you talk about direct presence, then it's probably the Dutch Rabobank, because it's the agricultural bank, and we talk about agriculture is really driving deforestation. So the Dutch Rabobank is very present in Brazil. You don't see an office or a bank office, or maybe there is somewhere, but I've never seen it in the Amazon. But they give loans, for example, to cattle farmers and soy farmers. And cattle and soy farmers are the ones that do a lot of deforestation. So if you give loans to a cattle or soy farm, well, then I always think it's difficult to not be involved in deforestation. And of course, banks always say, no, we're not involved in deforestation. But well, it's very difficult to check. And they're not very open about this. So it's very likely if you give loans to soy and cattle farmers that you're also linked to deforestation. And then to human rights violations as well, because, well, that's something we'll talk about more, but human rights are easily violated because people live there, and they have rights based on the Constitution, but they've never registered. That's a problem of a lot of traditional communities. They've never registered. Is that, hey, this is where we live? Because, for example, you need GPS equipment to register. Because the government needs to know, okay, where are you? And that you can only show this. Well, we have street addresses, but you don't have this in the Amazon. So then the government institution need a GPS. And if you don't have GPS equipment, you cannot show this is where we live. And so communities don't have this. Farmers do have it. And so this is why, so they're forgotten and overlooked. And people think, and then some of these farmers don't understand that they said, there's nobody living here. Well, yeah, I mean, if you live in a forest, you're not all the time in this piece of forest. I mean, people, if you live with a forest, it's different. There is the community, or maybe it's scattered. But people use the forest in different ways, and it doesn't mean that you're always, just like you're sitting in your house, you're staying in your house. Well, in the forest it's different. So people don't always realize that people use that forest, and they consider it theirs, and then they just forget about it, and well, then you get these human rights violations. So about the finance, it's direct and indirect. For Dutch money, the Dutch funding, it's mostly indirect. Funding, for example, soy companies, or also cattle companies like GBS, which is the biggest cattle company in the world. It's a Brazilian company. So there's another example of Dutch investment in a company that's likely to be linked to deforestation.
Right. Okay, thank you, Tim. I would like to give the floor again to Vandria, as she's going to explain us a little bit more about some Dutch enterprises there.
Das empresas que nós eu falei da Bung, ela é uma empresa de Amsterdam, né, na Holanda, a Cargill, que é a empresa norte-americana. A gente tem a empresa Hidrovias do Brasil e a Ciantop, né? Essas empresas, né, que formam um consórcio, né, de grande investimento, elas estão atuando na construção também de um grande corredor ferroviário, né, que vai surgir, que está sendo implementado da região do Mato Grosso, no estado do Mato Grosso, que vai atravessar, né, essa estrada vai atravessar a Amazônia, através sobre territórios indígenas e comunidades tradicionais e unidades de proteção, né, as unidades de conservação, vai atravessar essas áreas para escoamento da soja às margens do rio Tapajós, né, um porto de transbordo, né, de soja, de grãos, em Miritituba, próximo à cidade de Itaituba, né? Então, com a implementação desses grandes empreendimentos de hidrovia, desse complexo, né, de escoamento de soja, vai aumentar o desmatamento na nossa região, né? Vai atrair mais produtores de grãos e os conflitos fundiários, né, conflitos pela terra, vai aumentar. Esses são alguns exemplos, né, de transnacionais que trazem esse desenvolvimento, né, o desenvolvimento da morte, o desenvolvimento da destruição. E quem sofre com tudo isso, quem é que vai sofrer? Somos nós, povos indígenas e as comunidades tradicionais em nossos territórios, né, que sofremos principalmente as ameaças, né, que vêm justamente desses grandes latifundiários que venham grilar terra, que venham tomar as nossas terras, né, sendo legitimado pelo próprio governo federal. E nós, liderança, precisamos, né, alertar o mundo, né, de como as suas empresas, países europeus, de como suas empresas têm atuado em regiões como a Amazônia, né, violando nossos direitos humanos e trazendo a destruição para o meio ambiente.
Thank you, Vandria. Yeah, it is always shocking to see this map with this road in the middle of the forest. I was wondering if you could explain a bit to us about this mega project of road and railroad that is being built in the middle of the Amazon. What is the role of the Netherlands? Why is the Netherlands so involved? And, well, actually, what is it? Yes.
Well, so there is so it's around 10 years now, there's this plan to develop a network of railroads through the Amazon, basically from central Brazil, which is the soy production. The soy production is concentrated in central Brazil, but it's landlocked. There's no ports nearby. And right now, a lot of the soy goes south to Sao Paulo, and from where it's exported. So the idea, it was developed with Dutch engineers, actually, and there was an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, between the Brazilian government and the Dutch government in 2009 already, so over 10 years, under the government of Balkenende, which is already, and there was this MOU about infrastructure. And of course, the Netherlands is a country that has a highly developed infrastructure. It's a small country, and Brazil is known to have a poor infrastructure. So they thought, okay, and the Netherlands can help. So there was this memorandum of understanding, and Brazil said, "Oh, we want to find better ways to get the soy out of the country." And so there was a whole study, a Dutch-Brazilian study with Dutch engineers, and they came up with this plan of where to draw the railroads. And so they designed this plan of a whole network of railroads. Of each branch is over 1,000 kilometers, so huge. Basically, from central Brazil to the Amazon River, and it's called the Northern Ports. So it's really for logistical reasons to cut transport costs, And because now, for example, and especially for the soy for Europe, because China is the main destination of the soy for Brazil, but it goes southwards because it's the southern hemisphere. So it goes from central Brazil to Sao Paulo, and then it goes eastwards in the southern hemisphere to China. But the soy for Europe, and I think in the Netherlands is one of the main destinations for the soy of Europe. Well, for the soy of Europe, it's much more advantageous if you can export it from the north of Brazil. And where the north of Brazil? So the Amazon River. And the Amazon River is, very deep and large. And so ocean ships can easily go 2,000 kilometers upstream. So the Dutch have thought, we can build all those nice export harbors on the Amazon River. And that's the whole idea. So that from central Brazil, the different railroads will go or sometimes to another river, to the Tapajós River, like Vandria Export. And then, so the special boats already have been developed, push boats, by Cargill for the rivers that are less deep, like the Tapajós River is less deep than the Amazon River. So you have less deep boats and they bring it to the Amazon River. And at the Amazon River, the ocean ships can come. So that's a whole master plan that has been designed by several Dutch companies, actually, a whole consortium of Dutch companies. They've made the design. And Brazil now wants to build it. Brazil doesn't have the money. So Brazil's looking for money. So it's either from Saudi Arabia or from China. They've also offered interest. Or the big soy companies like Cargill or the ABCD companies, as they're called. ADM, B is Bunge, C Cargill, and D is Dreyfus. They are the biggest soy companies in the world. And they also have formed a consortium to exploit the first. Well, now actually, there's a whole network of this railroad, but now we're just talking about the first one. It's called the Ferrogrão. And it's the first one from central Brazil. It's planned to go to the Tapajós River. And like Vandria said, it goes through protected forests, and it goes through, it doesn't go through. If you look at on the map, it goes through indigenous territory, in territories of Quilombola. Quilombola is maybe a term that not everybody is familiar with. Quilombola is called Maroons, so the descendants of escaped slaves. So they also, just like the indigenous, they live in remote communities in the forest, and they also, based on the Brazilian Constitution, they have territorial rights. But the planned railroad goes the first part, and many people don't even know about this whole railroad plan. But if you look in the press, you only read mainly about the first one, the Ferrogrão. But it's just the first branch of a much bigger railroad network. But the first one, the Ferrogrão, is already leading to a lot of problems because communities are resisting. They said, hey, we didn't know that you're planning a railroad through our territories. And actually 2 weeks ago, the public prosecutor's office has stopped the procedure because the communities didn't know. And Brazil is a signatory of the convention C169 of the International Labour Organization. That means that tribal and indigenous people, communities, have the right, have to be involved in the whole decision-making process. But they were not. They didn't know. So this is a violation of Convention 169. So very recently, just 2 weeks ago, the federal public prosecutor's office said, hey, you have to stop this procedure because you're not respecting human rights, basically.
Thank you, Tim. We see as well in the Fair Finance Guide and also in a piece that Carlijn Kuipers wrote in 2018 for the Groene Amsterdammer. They both mentioned that the infrastructure projects are not only related to deforestation, of course, but to human rights violations, just like what Vandria mentioned earlier. Could you talk a bit more about that? How is the connection between building roads and violating human rights?
Yes. Well, suppose you live in the Netherlands, you're living somewhere in a village or in a town, and then the government is planning to build a railroad through your village. But you were never informed about it. So that's basically what we're talking about. And no, but of course you should be informed about it. But Convention 169, which Brazil is signatory to, actually says that the populations that are affected by these type of changes, land use changes, should be part of the decision-making process. Not only be informed, but they should be part of the decision-making process. So if you don't do this, and they're not doing this, they're not informing them, or there's a lot of manipulation going on. This is quite classical in the Amazon. And for example, because people know, oh yes, the communities have to be involved. So you have sometimes anthropologists really working for companies, and they're really manipulating communities, you know. And then, for example, because I've heard this many times of communities, they said, yeah, there was some guy passed by. He said he was doing a research, and then later on, later we find out they said we approved it. We never approved something. We just asked some questions, you know. So there's a lot of manipulation going on there. But the correct procedure is, and luckily Brazil has a good public prosecutor's office, you know, that stands for human rights and the rule of law. That the law is very clear that these communities that might be affected by these railroads should be, and ports should be informed, of course, but also be part of the whole decision-making process. And that's not being done. So that's a clear violation of human rights.
Okay, thank you.
Wow, thanks. No, thanks for telling us more about that relationship between this soy corridor, right? This big network of railroads and waterways and ports, and deforestation and human rights. We'll now go back to Vandria's testimony a third time.
A gente sabe que o desmatamento, ele disparou justamente com esse governo, né? O governo de Bolsonaro, que tem apoiado a grilagem de terra, né? A tomada de terras públicas, a tomada de terras indígenas, a tomada de terra de comunidades tradicionais, e apoiado principalmente na questão, né, de leis que venham aprovar, que venham permitir a exploração de minérios em terras indígenas. Então, esse governo que nós temos hoje, né, traz uma política de destruição. A gente precisa, nós, povos indígenas, a gente sofre uma pressão muito grande do governo com relação à tomada, à invasão dos territórios indígenas e das comunidades tradicionais da Amazônia. Por quê? Porque são nos territórios indígenas que ainda as áreas estão preservadas, né? Nós temos grande quantidade de recursos de madeira, de minério e da própria água, né? Aqui na nossa região do Baixo Tapajós, na região do Tapajós, nós temos a maior reserva de água do planeta, que é o aquífero Formação Alter do Chão, né, capaz de sustentar por milhares de anos a população mundial, né, com água. Então, esses recursos, eles estão na mira dos grandes investidores, e na maioria deles são de empresas internacionais, né, com capital estrangeiro, que tem apoio do governo federal. Esse desenvolvimento não é o desenvolvimento sustentável que as próprias transnacionais, elas vêm trazendo esse marketing, né, de desenvolvimento sustentável, tecnologias sustentáveis para a Amazônia na implementação de seus grandes projetos, porque na verdade esses grandes projetos eles trazem consigo a destruição da floresta, a poluição dos nossos rios, a expulsão de nós indígenas dos nossos territórios e essa exclusão social, né? Não é esse desenvolvimento que o governo federal tem que implementar. O desenvolvimento, né, ele vai principalmente traz essa justiça socioambiental, em que mantém as populações em seus territórios e mantém a floresta em pé. É esse tipo de desenvolvimento que nós queremos para a nossa região, né? Que nós possamos usufruir dos recursos existentes na Amazônia, mas de uma maneira racional, né? E sustentável, que venha atender a nós, povos indígenas, e também a nossas futuras gerações, né? Eu acredito que nós ganhamos muito mais, né, com a floresta em pé do que ela derrubada, né, do que ela tornar-se em um deserto.
Thanks, Vandria, for sharing your experience and your analysis of this so-called development, neoliberal development that's being imposed in your region, and also for sharing with us this, your analysis of this partnership between the economic power of corporations and the political power of the Brazilian government. In other words, business as usual. As we know, the political power in question is Bolsonaro's government, who came to office at the beginning of 2019. And of course, they came to office with a history of misogynist, racist, xenophobic hate, and are now imposing neoliberal, corporate-friendly policies for the Amazon and around the country. And yet Dutch corporations continue to invest and to operate in this region. And as we know, they're enabled by Dutch federal trade policy. So, Tim, it would be really great just to kind of get a feeling for how you understand how these Dutch corporations and how the Dutch government continues to justify this investment and these operations. And also, if you could tell us a little bit more about something you wrote about in the Down to Earth magazine interview that you gave in July 2018, where you actually talked about deforestation in the area as organized criminal activity. So if you could tell us a little bit more about that as well, that would be really great. Thank you.
Yes. Well, maybe first about the organized crime, because it's for some time that I characterize the deforestation, or some parts of the deforestation, as organized crime. So some people find it a bit strange, but well, for criminologists, what's organized crime? Of course, it's illegal. It has to be illegal. Most deforestation is illegal. It's a bit, the estimates are that maybe 80% of all the logging. This is illegal logging. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing. If it would be illegal, it would be too dangerous for me to stand there. You know, just on the picture here. So that was legal, but most of it is illegal. About 80%, 80. Those are the estimates, and then the same is for the deforestation, which is for agriculture, cattle and soy. Most of it as well is illegal. So there's the crime, and then how does it become organized crime? Well, for a criminologist, the organized crime is you often see the combination of violence and corruption. Because it means that the criminal group is so organized that it manages to stay immune from law enforcement, from the law. How do you do that? By corrupting people, then they're not going after you, or by threatening them and that they're afraid of you. So there's this combination of corruption and violence. And that's exactly what we see with deforestation, corruption and violence. Because the corruption happens at the land registry level, because a lot of land is illegally registered, because there's not a good land registry system yet. And in Para-state, what we're talking about, there's on paper 3 times more land on paper than there is in reality. So there's a lot of, actually some pieces of land have 10 different owners and the notaries are, in my language, the criminal facilitators, because a lot of this land is illegally registered in notary offices. And it's suggesting that it's ownership, but it's not. It's just so there's land fraud and corruption, and then there's violence because so a lot of farmers illegally register land, but in the communities they have the rights based on the constitution. But they have not registered, because you need GPS equipment and you need to go to the city to do that, because you cannot register in the forest. You have to go to the capital and then register, and then you have to give, okay, this is where we live, and you have to give the coordinates. And of course, and this is complicated because you need GPS equipment and all that to do that, which people don't have, or to pay somebody to come to your village with GPS. So, but farmers can do this, illegally register land and suggest that they are the owners, but they're not. But then the people who were living there, they said, hey, we were living here. How can you deforest it? I said, no. I have paperwork here. And that's the cause of conflicts. And then it's very often also in the context of racism, because most of these farmers are white Brazilians, European Brazilians from European descent. They're not from the Amazon. So they come there, they look down, because there's a lot of racism. They look down on these indigenous or black people living in the forest, and they're just living in the forest doing nothing. We make it productive, this land. So there's a lot of violence against the people, the traditional populations, the indigenous and the quilombolas and other traditional populations that have rights to live there based on the constitution, but they have never managed to really fulfill those rights. And so that's where you have these conflicts. So it's very common, unfortunately, that large landowners, and they hire people like gunmen, pistoleros, to drive away, to push them away. So there's a lot of violence. And that really makes it organized crime, the combination of corruption, land fraud, and violence. And interestingly, the public prosecutor's office increasingly sees deforestation as organized crime. There were 2 meetings, and I participated in one this year, webinars of the Public Prosecutor's Office. It's because of especially the fraud and the corruption, that it should be considered as organized crime.
And in the minute we have left, could you then tell us a little bit more about how the Dutch justify their operations and investments given this context over there?
I mean, these are things that are hardly addressed, and even, for example, that the land registry system is not good. It's people, these people prefer not to talk about it, and then the whole business sector, everybody's selling it as sustainable, and of course, all the companies said, and all the big soy companies, and also the cattle farms, they say we're not involved. So everybody said we're not involved, we're not doing it. It's so somehow mysterious who's doing it. The deforestation, because they said no, it's not us. And then it's so far removed from our reality here that people tend to believe it, and they're nice people, and the hardworking people, hardworking farmers. If the Netherlands is, there's a tradition of farming as well, so they're not really seen as criminals or people who are breaking the laws. But it's also all sold as being okay and sustainable, and it's what people accept and like to accept.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. Hard to swallow, but thank you for ending this part of our conversation with that explanation. As we come into our Q&A session, don't forget to send any questions you might have to Gabi, who's looking after us backstage. And while you're doing that, we can enjoy a song. It's called Apesar de Você. It's originally by Chico Buarque, here musically arranged by Nelson Latif on the 7-string guitar. And he's accompanied by 2 friends and musicians here in Amsterdam, Ivan Saylor and Elaine Pettersen.
Gente hoje anda falando de lado e olhando pro chão. Viu você que inventou esse estado, inventou de inventar toda a escuridão. Você que inventou o pecado, esqueceu-se de inventar o perdão. Apesar de você pergunto a você onde vai se esconder na enorme euforia. Como vai proibir quando o galo insistir em cantar? Água nova jorrando e a gente se amando sem parar. Amanhã vai ser outro dia. Amanhã vai ser outro dia.
Welcome back. Now we enter the Q&A session of our live cast, and the first question will be to Vandria. As she will answer in Portuguese, Celinha has agreed to consecutively translate her, but we kindly ask you to please bear with us. Vandria, we have a question for you from Daniel in Glasgow. He would like to know how could we develop Amazon without turning it into big plantations?
Então, olá a todos, né? Eu falo aqui diretamente de Alter do Chão, né? O território Borari na Amazônia. Essa é uma pergunta extremamente importante para entender, né, que é possível, né, utilizar a Amazônia sem derrubá-la. E como isso pode ocorrer? nós, povos indígenas, milenarmente, por muitas gerações, nós já trabalhamos na utilização da nossa floresta, né? Nós temos uma cultura milenar, né, da plantação, que é uma cultura que está a nosso nível entre convívio entre o povo, né? Então, a floresta, né, além de a gente trabalhar com a plantação, diretamente com a terra, a floresta, ela nos dá tudo, né? Nós temos a água, nós temos as plantas medicinais, as plantas de cura, nós temos as florestas, né, as árvores, né, que produzem os óleos que são utilizados hoje na farmácia, né? E
I think Celinha
os recursos que hoje são utilizados pelas grandes corporações, né, que poluem nossos rios, que desmatam nossa floresta, né, que destrói nosso território, esses recursos utilizados em projetos para nossas aldeias e nossas comunidades, né, na agricultura familiar, né, em plantas medicinais da cura da floresta, né, que vem a nossa medicina, ela é ancestral, vem da floresta. Se utilizar esses recursos, né, em projetos que sejam nós protagonistas, dessa forma a gente mantém a floresta em pé, né, nós protegemos nossos territórios e nós, povos indígenas e comunidades tradicionais, né, seríamos beneficiados diretamente. Eu acredito em projetos voltados diretamente para nós aqui na Amazônia, é o caminho que nós temos para proteger, né, as florestas, os territórios indígenas.
Obrigada, querida. Thank you, Vandria.
So Vandria says, hello to everyone. I'm talking to you from the Alta da Chão in the Borari territory in the Amazon. This is a really important question. Is it possible to use the Amazon without felling it, without cutting down the trees? How do we do that? As indigenous peoples, during through many generations, we have used the forest. It is part of our culture. It's a millennial culture of plantation, of use of the earth, and of convivencia, of living in harmony with the forest. The water, the medicinal plants, this is ancestral knowledge that we have and an ancestral relationship that we have with them. When these resources are used by corporations in projects, our rivers are polluted, our forests are cut down, and therefore these resources are no longer available to us, the peoples. We need projects where we are the protagonists, where we, indigenous peoples, are the protagonists, where we can keep the forest standing, where we can protect our territories and directly benefit our peoples.
Thank you, Celinha. That was brilliant. Thank you, Vandria, again. I have a question here for Tim from Vitor in Rotterdam. He's asking, I've read in Albert Heijn does not use any soy coming from the Amazon, and that the soy used in the Netherlands is sustainable. Is soy sustainable, Tim?
Well, first about the Albert Heijn, I think I know that Albert Heijn said that they're not using soy from the Amazon, but I think that's not true. I think because the supply chain from soy is so non-transparent that nobody knows exactly where the soy is coming from. So that to begin with. So you cannot make those claims. With coffee you can, but with soy you can't, because it's so-called bulk, so it's in ships of 80 or 100 meters long, and it's all the trucks from different places, they all bring the soy, and it goes in one ship, and then when the ship arrives from Bungie here in Amsterdam or Rotterdam, you don't know from which farm it comes. If it's from Mato Grosso or from the Amazon. So Albert Heijn is also using soy from the Amazon. And it's called, is it sustainable? No, well, it depends what you mean by sustainable, because it's being sold as sustainable. There's actually an interesting study from maybe 2 or 3 years ago by the Hague Institute of Strategic Studies, and they did a language analysis, a discourse analysis, and really a quantitative analysis of which words are being used in all the documents of the Brazilian government about soy. Really, there was, you can just find it, this study. And one of the interesting things is, what's in this study, that the Brazilians of the soy business and also the government stimulating the soy business, they use sustainable in an economic sense, meaning that it's a sustainable economy, it's a sustainable sector, meaning a sector that's sustainable for the future, for 2030. So it's not, and then the soy arrives here, and then people say sustainable, but sustainable in an environmental sense or ecological sense. So it's which it never was. So no, it's not environmentally sustainable, it's only economically sustainable. Well, that's what they hope. Actually, it's not, because there's also, now because of the deforestation, the soy sector is in danger too for the long run, because of deforestation, there's less rain. So, I mean, they cannot sustain it for a long time into the future, because the deforestation will lead to less rain, and so there will be no future for the soy industry. But it's not even environmentally sustainable. It's not at all, because first we're cutting rainforest for soy, or with former cattle fields. There is this, what we often hear, there's no more deforestation for soy in the Amazon, but there still is deforestation for soy. If you go to the Amazon, if you go to the deforestation hotspots, people will tell you that there is still deforestation for soy, of secondary forest, which is regrowth forest, but also primary forest. It's only the soy companies saying there's no more deforestation for soy, but there is still, but it's reduced, but it still is. But then there is a lot of glyphosate spraying, which is the most used herbicide in the world, which is there's court cases in the United States now because of Bayer. It used to be Monsanto, this glyphosate, and now it was bought by Bayer. There's lots of court cases. They settled it now for over $10 billion because a lot of people have problems with the glyphosate. Now there's huge glyphosate use and other pesticide and herbicide use in the Amazon, and all these monocultures needs huge quantities of pesticides and herbicides, and it's something we don't often hear about, but the people living there complain a lot about it, because it goes into the streams, and when they're spraying, it goes into the schools. I know several primary schools that are wooden buildings with no glass windows, because we're in Amazon, and with the spraying, all the glyphosate goes into the schools. So a lot of people complain about respiratory problems. That say the streams, because they don't drink from the tap like we do, but they drink from the streams, and they say a lot of the streams are getting polluted by the glyphosate, and they say our crops burn and destroyed also. So it's not at all sustainable.
Thank you, Tim. That is really eye-opening. For the minute we have left, I have a question from Katie. She's asking if you could tell us a bit more how the Bolsonaro government has strengthened this dynamic of exploitation in the Amazon, and if you could also wrap it up with your final considerations.
Well, the Bolsonaro government is trying to change some laws and to stop the territorial rights of traditional people. So for example, what Vanya said, to allow mining in indigenous territories. Right now, indigenous territories, the indigenous have territorial controls. So they want to change the law. That's basically the main strategy. So to take away the territorial rights of indigenous people, and then we're talking about that has already been given, or where they have the rights. But there's a lot of indigenous that don't have yet right. They're still fighting for their rights, like territorial rights. But this is the main strategy, to take away the rights and to change the law in order to allow more farming and more mining in the Amazon. So that's the strategy.
Thank you, Tim. That was fantastic. As we enter the last part of our livecast now, I would like to give the floor to Vandria one more time. She will let us know how we in the Netherlands can support their fight in the Amazon.
O que eu posso dizer à comunidade internacional, né, que fiscalizem suas empresas. Quais são as empresas que atuam aqui na Amazônia, que destroem vidas, né? Quais são os alimentos e os produtos que saem daqui e são consumidos por vocês aí na Europa, né? Esse produto, ele destruiu quantos hectares de floresta? Essa madeira, né? Quantos territórios foram invadidos? Esse ouro, quantas crianças indígenas foram contaminadas? Quantos anciões morreram de problemas do ouro que você está utilizando, né? Então, é um alerta que eu faço e que cobre, né, dos seus governos, né, uma política, né, de comércio que seja justa, né? Porque muitos países eles falam desse desenvolvimento sustentável, né, dessa proteção do meio ambiente, mas que na maioria essa prática de proteção do meio ambiente ela acontece no seu país, na sua área, no seu território, né? Enquanto temos empresas que estão atuando em áreas da Amazônia, que estão matando liderança, que estão desmatando hectares de floresta que compreende a área territorial do seu país, que estão poluindo os rios, que está poluindo o ar, né? Que está matando a biodiversidade e destruindo o futuro das nossas gerações, das nossas crianças, né? Que é a Amazônia. Então, é um alerta que eu faço a todas as pessoas que consomem produtos oriundos da Amazônia e de territórios indígenas, que controle, que cobre do seu governo medidas eficazes de proteção, né, da região Amazônia, que venha proteger as nossas vidas. A floresta em si, ela se mantém, mas nós, sem a floresta, nós não vamos sobreviver. Eu queria deixar um agradecimento a todos aqui por este momento. A nossa resistência também ela está se dando através de ações voltadas para nossos territórios. Se vocês quiserem conhecer um pouco dos projetos que a gente tem desenvolvido aqui na região do Baixo Tapajós, principalmente relacionado à proteção dos nossos territórios, né, projetos realmente de desenvolvimento sustentáveis, vocês podem entrar em contato comigo, né, e conhecer um pouco mais da nossa história e da nossa luta de resistência. Um obrigado a todos. Na nossa língua a gente fala
So Vandria has invited us to hold transnational corporations in the Netherlands accountable and to demand effective measures to protect the Amazon region and its peoples. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us as citizens and residents here in the Netherlands? There are two really important campaigns that as a Brazilian collective and with our partner organizations, we are supporting and mobilizing for. The first is a UN binding treaty on corporations, on transnational corporations and other business enterprises with respect to human rights. We're fighting for this ambitious UN binding treaty because if it becomes a reality, it will be possible for affected peoples and communities to hold transnational corporations. And of course, that includes those with their head offices here in the Netherlands, legally accountable for human rights violations and environmental crimes in front of an international court. So for the last 6 years, a broad international people's movement has been pushing for further development of this binding treaty and proposing substantive content to the text, culminating every year in October, as it did this year, in a meeting of the UN Working Group in Geneva. For more information, please see the link that Gabby has just copied onto the live chat, and please do contact your local representatives and ask them to support the emerging network of local authorities who are supporting this binding treaty. You can ask them to sign the statement in the website Gabby has also just copied into the live chat. Thanks, Gabby. And for equally important action at the national level, please join us in supporting a new campaign called the Initiative for Sustainable and Responsible Business Conduct, IDVO in the Dutch acronym. And as we've seen today with the example of the Sorridor, but we could be talking about beef or coffee or palm oil or wood, corporations are directly exploiting and benefiting from territories, from nature, from peoples in the global south with impunity for the environmental and human rights violations in their value chains. We know that voluntary guidelines and certification do not hold Dutch corporations accountable. So the Initiative for Sustainable and Responsible Business Conduct is lobbying for a legislative framework here in the Netherlands that would hold them legally accountable for violations in their value chains, wherever they operate. Please support this campaign by sending your logo, if you're an organization, to this initiative, the IDVO. And if you're an individual, perhaps by spreading the word and supporting the actions of the IDVO on social media. And again, Gabby is sharing the website link on the live chat now. And we're also collectively fighting to bury the EU-Mercosur free trade agreement once and for all. It's a neoliberal tool for the accumulation of profit for EU corporations and companies and for Brazilian agro-industry. So please do also look out for ways that you can support that campaign as part of your activism. Gabby has just posted the link for letters from organizations on both sides of the Atlantic explaining why they're against this free trade agreement. Please do take a look. And lastly, it's important to remember, we think it's important to remember, particularly in this pandemic period, that our collective resistance also and principally happens in the streets and in public spaces. It's where our collective dialogues with the Dutch society, and it's where we stand in active solidarity with our Brazilian comrades. It's also where Brazilian social movements claim their political space and fight for their demands. And it's where we need to keep mobilizing and making our voices heard here in the Netherlands. We encourage you to find your space for collective resistance and for building alternatives. We refuse to go back to the old exploitative normal. We are building a just recovery from this crisis based on internationalist solidarity here in Brazil and around the world. Fora Bolsonaro.
Thank you, Celina, for this very strong call to action. As we wrap up the amazing night we've had tonight, I would like to thank first our guests. So, Tim, thank you very much for your participation. Vandria, thank you. Obrigada. I would also like to thank our partner organizations, TNI, SOMO, both ends. Also a warm thanks to our friends, Lee Pegler, Fábio de Castro, Patricia, Bernardo, Sandy, thank you. Without you, we wouldn't be here. A big warm hug to our comrades in the collective. So we're here. It's done. Also, thank to Pakhuis de Zwijger for the collaboration, for the patients, Thomas and Max. Inajara Dis for the video editing. And I would like to thank you also for the amazing questions. We didn't have time to answer them all, but it was great to see you engaged. We'd also like to invite you to follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, Amsterdam Collective for Brazilian Democracy. And as we close our night, I can see that we have discussed some serious issues and we can finish our night a bit pessimistic. It's only natural that Reason will be pessimistic tonight, but we would like to leave you literally on an optimistic tone. We'll have our friends Ivan Saylor, Nelson Latif and Elaine Patterson reminding us that life should be better and that it will be. So thank you very much and fora Bolsonaro.
E a vida o que é, diga lá, meu irmão. Ela é a batida de coração. Ela é uma doce ilusão, mas e a vida? Ela é maravilha ou é sofrimento? Ela é alegria ou lamento? O que é, meu irmão? Há quem fale que a vida da gente é um nada no mundo. É profundo. É um sopro do Criador, numa atitude repleta de amor. Você diz que é luta e prazer, ele diz que a vida é viver. Ela diz que melhor é morrer, pois amada não é e o verbo é sofrer. Eu só sei que confio na moça e na moça eu ponho a força da fé. Somos nós que fazemos a vida, pro que der ou quiser ou vier. Sempre desejada, por mais que esteja errada. Ninguém quer a morte, só saúde e sorte. E a pergunta roda e a cabeça agita. Eu fico com a pureza da resposta das crianças. É a vida, é bonita e é bonita. Viver e não ter a vergonha de ser.